Hey everyone, you're watching Got Questions. We wanted to create a space to discuss the questions that young people, Gen Z, are actually asking. We love this generation, so it's time we start listening to them. The aim of this show is not to have all the answers, but to hopefully journey together in discovery.
This content has been created by Alpha Youth. Alpha, or also known as the Alpha Course, is an opportunity to explore the meaning of life, faith, and purpose in a safe space where no question is off the table.
That's right. And so today, we have a fantastic conversation circling the topics of anti-racism and wokeness. We're including wokeness in the conversation today because it's clear that this pursuit of becoming woken up to the social injustices around you has become increasingly important amongst our generation. Our heart with this conversation is to be as transparent with our experiences, but mainly to ask the tough questions that we want to have answered.
So let's get into it.
All right, so before we get into the chat, just going to chat through our cultures, our key cultures, Azande.
I love the key cultures. So number one is that if you do disagree, you disagree respectfully. Who remembers 2 and 3?
I remember love listens.
Yes.
Yeah,
And your opinion is valued.
that's right. 3 keys. All right, so we can get into the discussion. Today's one is called the Great A-WOKE-NING, right? Because the world was in a slumber when it comes to racism, and it has woken up. We've become more aware of what's actually taking place. Now, let's just chat on this word, being woke, awakening. Do you guys see it as a positive word, being woke, or a negative word?
I think it depends on how you use it. I think some people think you have to be woke, so you have to know everything. You must have an answer to everything. You must have an opinion about everything. So I think it can be negative when someone doesn't have an opinion on anything, but they feel like they have to say something, like social media, like the whole BLM thing. Some people didn't know anything about it, but everyone's kind of pressuring them to feel like, oh, they have to put the black square up or they have to say something. So I guess I would say that's when it turns negative, when people are pressuring you to be woke. And I feel like woke should just be it should be a natural thing, something that you just, you're able to ask questions, you're able to learn.
I think also the wokeness idea of I'm woke, so I'm not more than you. I think that's such a negative connotation, isn't it? Like, I have so much information, I'm smart, I've got the facts, so I'm more superior than you. Some people can feel like they're more superior because they know more information.
It's like, is knowing the information like the vital part though? Because I feel as if people like feel really proud of knowing loads of stuff. Like, do you feel as if like you're like, okay, you know loads, but like, are you doing anything about it? Or do you feel the pressure of having to do loads because you know loads, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe I have like a misconception of like what work means, but like I guess work to me just means like you're catching on the trends and you're relatable. That's the main thing that comes to me when that person's woke. He's just into what is in at the moment, basically.
So is it positive or negative?
So in that case, I think it's kind of what Aya said. It's like it's your reasoning behind it. Are you being relatable for relatability's sake? And you actually know it's like, actually, is there a good reason to be relatable? Or are you actually doing it for the better? Especially for young people. Are you actually trying to relate to them in a sense of like, oh, they're battling through this. Let's try to like just understand their thoughts. Or are you trying to relate to them on another side of like, taking to an extreme, let's venture into drugs. We know what they're, if they're going through it. That's like very extreme of being like relatable to very extreme.
Right.
There's no point.
You mentioned BLM, Black Lives Matters, and obviously the protest took place after the death of George Floyd. Are you guys cool chatting about whether you did go to the protest or you didn't?
Yeah. I went to the protest. It was really, I personally thought it was a really beautiful sight, seeing everyone come together and support that movement. So I really enjoyed it, which is like a word that you wouldn't typically use for that protest. You wouldn't really use enjoy.
Yeah. I personally didn't go because my parents were like, it's illegal. But, sorry. But I really felt like it was my obligation to still do something. So I took to social media. I was very, very vocal about how I felt about it. And also I took to my MPs. I couldn't stand on the street and show my MPs what I was saying, but I could use my words and speak. So while I was watching the marches through my phone and keeping up to date, and I had friends there who would text me going, this is happening. And so I felt like I was kind of there, but I also felt like I was really there through my behaviour, emailing my MPs, talking to my friends who were like, what is going on? Talking to my grandparents, my parents, having like family meetings and being like, this is going on. Like, what are we as a family going to do? And it kind of was like doing it in my own home, which, if you are in a place where you don't have either a family who agree or like you're in a situation where you wouldn't be allowed to go to these certain things, there's always something we can do in the background, which, you know, I know the pictures won't be great, but you know, you're actually doing something as well. So that's what I did.
Yeah, because I didn't go to the protest I had different reasons. First of all, like I didn't want to put my family at risk about going out and stuff like that. I also felt like, for some weird reason, I don't know if it's wrong to say, but for some reason I felt nice. It felt nice to sit in the background and watch people actually fight for you, rather than me being there myself. So, like, obviously I did some stuff and I spoke about things when I had to. But I also don't like hopping on trends because everybody's doing it. So I didn't feel pressured to go. And I also didn't feel like, like I said, it just felt nice to sit back and watch people actually fight for you instead of you always doing the fighting yourself.
Benita, you're a youth leader, or you've been involved with youth for many years at Hillsong. What was it like for you when a lot of your young people kind of did want to go to protests and they're sort of probably coming to you with lots of pastoral issues, calling, you know, they would have been dealing with stuff, but at the same time you had to deal with that yourself. How did you cope?
I mean, it was definitely a season. Being a black man myself, I think, you know, I had my feelings and how I felt towards it. But I think it was a mix of emotions, you know. Some, you know, of course, young people, parents were saying not all of them can go to the protest. Some of them went to the protest. Some went with their parents, which was crazy. But I think for me, the bigger question was just seeing the unity. When you look into the crowd, people from different walks of life, different ages, different backgrounds, it was beautiful. You know, it's like everyone was unified to stand against this message of discrimination towards a people because of maybe the colour of their skin and where they come from. So I think that was really beautiful, but I was really proud of the young people, to be honest. I think, similar to what you said, a lot of people didn't go to the protests, but they used their influence. And I think if we can learn anything from what happened when we watched Euros, you know, and the race incident that happened over there, what we saw was people using their platform, using their social medias, having the conversations in the house. And I think that's where change comes, when these conversations are happening in the house with parents, with friends. So I just think proud of the young people. And I think the young people are just passionate. They're really passionate about justice, you know, and I think that's what we saw through the protests, that's what we saw through the Euros, is young people speaking out and actually sharing their opinion, but not just sharing their opinion, looking for a solution to bring the change. And I think sometimes talking about the wokeness that we spoke about at the beginning, sometimes you can have the information, but there's nothing backing up that information, you know. I think young people are looking for solutions.
Benita's got a daughter, and so she'd be Generation Alpha, which is the generation after Gen Z. Do you guys think there's hope for that generation, for them to grow up in maybe a nation like England where there's like zero tolerance to racism?
So maybe slightly alluding to that question, but it's to, like with Benita, in terms of like young people wanting justice. With that, do you think young people know what justice actually is or means? Because justice is great, but what does that look like? And I think that's a quite big question of like trends, hopping on the trends, because like some people telling you this is what justice looks like, and other people telling you another one. And so with like young people growing up, you know, Generation Alpha, what will it look like for them to actually say like, actually, this is the right way to do something?
I think that's a great question. I think, you know, for a lot of people, justice means something different to them, right? But for me as a Christian, I look at the life of Jesus and how he loved people and how he placed value on people. So we're talking about the incidents of the protest, you know, it's people being discriminated or a man being murdered because of the colour of his skin, right? So injustice is us saying that's okay, right? Would Jesus allow that to happen? The question is, how do we go about the justice? How do we have the conversations? And I think the important thing is to have conversations like this, is to educate ourselves and for us to feel like we're not pressured to put the black box up, you know, we're not pressured to have to go to the protest, but we can just ask questions like, what does it look like for you? But most importantly, look into the word, you know, what does the Bible say about justice? And I think a lot of people are angry, you know, and it's okay to have righteous anger, which is anger in the right direction in terms of, hey, I'm upset and it's okay to be upset, but what can I do to bring a difference in my world? Instead of going the opposite direction, as we know what happens when you go the opposite direction. And I just think it was so cool seeing young people just being passionate about it, you know? But I think as a youth leader, it was our responsibility to actually guide them with those questions, similar to what you're saying, is some people were upset, some people weren't upset, some people just had questions. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to educate people.
Yeah, just to answer the question you said, I think there is hope for, is it Gen Alpha, you said? Yeah, because like growing up as a black person, your parents would have conversation with you about this is how the way the world works. But I think with people who are white, like I know you have a son, I feel like you are having that conversation with your son now. For the people who want change, you're having this conversation with their kids too. So it's not just people like Benito having the conversation with his daughter when he's young, you're also having the conversation. So I feel like there is hope in that direction when parents are like, I want my kids to be brought up in this way so they know the way the world works. And we're not just fighting on our own, but there's people like you teaching your son and you're like fighting with us too. So I do think there is hope in that sense.
And I think COVID really helped that because we finally had a time of silence. Like when Omid Aubrey first, that happened. I remember that morning I'd gone outside, and in London, for the first time ever, I'd walked outside of my house and I couldn't hear cars. And I think that was so significant because it was the same with social media, is people were just trying to work out what they were meant to be doing, and it meant there was so much space and time and silence to hear his name. And the same with George. People were actually able to hear this situation happened. Because normally, you've got work, then you've got to feed the kids, you've got to do all these things, and you hear the news and you're like, oh, this happened in America over there, yeah, it's really bad. But when you've got a whole day where, you're on leave or school's not going properly and you've got to sit in this silence and just hear his name and hear what actually happened to him and the reasons it happened, it kind of settled in people, and they were like, oh, this isn't just an issue that was for my grandparents, this is an issue for my great-grandchildren. And so I need to work, I need to put in the time, and I need to give something for this man who is real, and for this man who, yes, was living in America, but now I've realised this is a thing in England as well. This is an actual issue, and I'm going to put in the time. And yes, silence just gave us that. And I think COVID, yes, it was really, really awful, but it also gave us so many opportunities which will affect the next generation in a way that we will never be able to compute, because we never will have known what life would have been like if we hadn't had this situation. And so I do have great hope. I mean, I'm quite skeptical. I'm a bit like, I want it to happen really fast, but I know it's going to be a process. But I do believe that the next generation are going to be led by people who otherwise wouldn't have had the time to put their energies into this.
I like that you said there was a process, because I think being a black man living in London, born and raised in London, I love my city. I think East London is the best. I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Come on.
Check it out. But I love my city, and I think, I always, the one line that's really helped encourage me in the season is that the world isn't changed by your opinion, but it's changed by your example, And I think there is a future for the young people. And as a youth leader, it's my responsibility to set the example and to help them, to encourage them to ask the right questions, and also help them to love their people who are around them.
This is so, so great. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing so openly. There's so much more to come. But now let's check in with our regional Alpha Youth directors who are gathered over Zoom. Let's take a look.
Does wokeness, to a certain degree, promote discussion, or does it force you to have an opinion or perceive an issue a certain way? And if you're not, you're wrong. I think with wokeness and how it works, it has made society increasingly polarized, and because I feel like you have to choose, you're either one camp or you're another camp, and you have to be immediately knowledgeable about anything. I've had conversations before where I know nothing about the topic, but suddenly there and then I'm supposed to form an opinion about it because it's a woke topic. So people are supposed to be talking about it. And I think there's this misconception that you have to know what's going on around you at all the times. You have to be opinionated. But just because you're knowledgeable about something, I don't think it means you're wise on the issue.
History also plays an important role in us understanding what it is for us to move forward in making sure that we become okay as a country. But I believe when so many people still don't quite understand the history in it and the ideas as to where that came from, then I believe, how do we ever look to a future? And with that being said, then it affects how you view yourself. Am I worthy of having a Black Jesus, or am I worthy of associating myself with such superior, a superior person, because that is what it's often associated with.
As believers, it's important to know how to handle situations such as racism in the church place, in the era of the church. Whether you disagree with somebody's beliefs or you agree, there's a fine line between being able to still care for their person and share your beliefs or reprimanding them immediately. Portraying Jesus as a white person or as an American definitely has created some sort of a white savior philosophy among many young people, because history simply has yet to incorporate into its education system that no, this is not factual.
To be awake is not to deny someone else's experience. And I think to be woke with social issues as racism is to try and learn and understand what it is. And so, but also I think as long as there is sin in the world, racism will always exist, in my opinion. And I believe that racism is an evil spirit that the enemy uses to divide God's people. But that doesn't mean that we as believers and as the next generation can't work towards a world where racism doesn't exist.
Huh? How good was that chat? Hearing from young people across the globe on Zoom. You love Zoom.
No.
You don't love it. Zande does not like Zoom. We're going to continue our chat, and we've got a guest with us. Here's a detective inspector. Please put your hands together for Henk Bediako, everybody. So good to have you with us. Thank you so much for taking the time. You've been part of the Met Police for 15 years.
Yeah.
Tell us, Henk, is it like Sherlock Holmes, being a detective?
Unfortunately not. So the thing about Sherlock is he walks into a room and within seconds he's figured out exactly what's taken place. Whereas in the real world, with real detectives, we have to do it step by step. And one of the key things about being a detective is keeping an open mind. So essentially it's like trying to put together a story of what's happened. And I love it because I just find it so interesting. And every so often you get a proper mystery that you have to try and solve. So,
Henk, you've got one of the greatest jobs ever in the world. Like, you're a detective. Incredible. What is it like being a black man in the police force?
yeah, so do you know what? It's definitely interesting. I think for me at the start, I didn't realise the significance of it. It was just something that I was interested in. But then after I joined the police and I started interacting with people, I realised that it was actually a significant thing that I'd done. So on the one hand, I had other black people coming up to me in the street saying, "Oh, it's great to see you as a police officer." On the other hand, I had a lot of abuse from people who felt that I'd somehow sold out by joining the police. I didn't really fully understand that dynamic. But I think as time has gone on, I can see that being a black police officer in particular, and really working hard to be good at what I do, has a positive effect to people who see me. So, yeah, I actually place some significance on that, being a black police officer.
Yeah, just in terms of the question she just asked you, you were like, obviously you're black police, but how was it like were you in the process? Like, were you working during the process? Like, how was that for you as a black person?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was working. I wasn't physically involved in the protests. It's because my job, I'm a specialist detective, so I'm not involved in that kind of policing protests. But the general idea of the protests, i.e. Black Lives Matter, that statement, that's something I agreed with. I felt a lot of tension at that time because seeing the protests and seeing how some of the protesters, a small minority, were behaving violently towards the police, seeing my colleagues getting injured, that was really hard for me to see. So it was this very odd tension of agreeing broadly with the idea that Black Lives Matter, agreeing broadly that actually there's been centuries of inequality that needs to be addressed, that the UK has got a specific history that needs to be addressed. So broadly agreeing, but then seeing the activities of a few sort of undermining that.
So I actually went to the protest. In the eyes of a police officer, do you think that was the right thing to do?
Yeah, you know, another good question. I don't think it's a question of right or wrong. And I was thinking about this. So for me as a police officer, it would have been wrong for me to participate because my job is to uphold the rule of law. Now, I was thinking about when in Romans, Paul talks about how it's right for some people to eat vegetables and it's right for some people to eat meat. That's what I was kind of thinking about in terms of the protests. I think the important thing is that people are able to follow their convictions and they're able to do it with wisdom and they're able to make a good judgment because there could have been a different situation where actually that wasn't the right thing to do. The thing about the protests is, yes, initially the government came out and said that, you know, it needs to stop. But then the position changed as the protests developed. And as the sort of a global response came with these protests, we can see that a lot of effect has resulted from protesting. A lot has changed. Some people feel that not enough has changed, but I fully acknowledge that so much has changed. So for me, it's not a question of right or wrong. It's a question of actually this was someone's personal conviction to do it. My job as a police officer is to ensure that people are safe whilst they're protesting, and that was the job of the police at the time. If we recall, straight after some of the Black Lives Matter protests, there were other protests. So there was a right-wing protest. When you look at how that was policed, it was policed differently to the way that Black Lives Matter was policed. It's because the police had made an assessment of the individuals going to the different protests, so they required a different response.
I think, Hank, if you don't mind, you know, I know you're a man, you've got faith, you go to church, and I know, Benito, you've already, you know, touched on, you know, Jesus and what would Jesus do in these different situations. I guess if you don't mind, we'll just talk about the elephant in the room. In the United Kingdom, Jesus is portrayed as a white Swedish man with long blonde hair and a white sash, where he would have been a Middle Eastern man with dark skin. I guess my question is now, moving forward, wherever there is a white Jesus, whether it's digital, physical, whether it's on the wall or it's in front of you, do we think that that should be removed and so white Jesus doesn't exist anymore? Or do we think those, I guess, those things, those as traditional as they are, they can still exist and still be there as visible, you know? Just putting it out there. I know it can be slightly sensitive, but what do people think about that?
I think it should be taken away, just because I feel like with younger kids growing up, like, how are they gonna actually see we've made change? Like, they're gonna grow up, like, because we are at the age now where we have to unlearn a lot of things. So why can't we just make them learn that Jesus looks like this instead of them growing up saying, oh, Jesus is white, but you have to teach them that Jesus is not actually white. It's just easier just to get rid of it and they'll see Jesus as not white straight away, because I think it just takes away. I feel like unlearning is harder than learning. So, yeah, that's why I think it should just be gone.
I think that image of Jesus just reminds me, whenever I see it, that, you know, that racism is a systematic problem, you know? It was positioned there. I think when I first became a Christian, I wasn't even a Christian, but when my mum would take me to church, it was hard for me to relate because everyone in the church didn't look like me, and then the person that we're worshipping doesn't look like me. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is not for me, you know, or maybe there's something wrong with me. And that's not the case at all. You know, I think when I came of age of understanding how to read the Bible for myself and reading the verses, I realized Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is not in Scandinavia. Okay, what's going on here? Jesus isn't you know, does that make sense? So I think encouraging people to actually read the Bible for themselves and to ask the right questions is really important. But that can be extremely difficult when we just say, this is the image of who Jesus is. Don't worry about the information.
Yeah, I think either just have a cross or show the real man. Like, you have the choice, but why deceive people? Why do something that's not real? It's not true to put a white man on a cross and say, this is who died for you, because that's not what happened. He was, like, it was all intentional where he was for a reason, because at the time it had very big cultural significance. And so we've got to go through that. Like, we tell this story so many times. Like, people know where he's from. I don't think it's a secret. So, like, just, you can just have a cross. You don't, if it's that big of a deal to you, just have a cross. Or just, yeah, put the real man up there.
So, Hank, Gen Z is completely on board with justice, which is amazing. I feel as if there's never been a generation that's been more vocal. So how can, you know, Gen Z work alongside the police in order to see justice really become normality, really?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so the first thing I would say is really trying to understand how the police operate and what the purpose of the police is. And that is to look after everyone in society. Then thinking about practically, so I think people should really consider becoming police officers. That is my number one thing. The only way we're going to have a diverse police force that looks, or police service I should say, that looks and feels like London, which is one of our objectives, is for more diverse people to consider it as a career. And I can say I'm so glad that I chose to become a police officer. Then we have practical things that are linked with the government. So you'll see on many local boroughs, you have things like youth panels, and there's a youth parliament. There are so many opportunities for young people to get involved in politics. For me, that is really key, because that is the mechanism that change happens in this country. So we have got protests. The thing that I would add to that kind of activity is being politically literate. Understand how the political process in this country works, understand how you can write a letter to your local MP, and that will get them to start talking about whatever it is you're bothered about. One good example of this was a school, I can't remember where it was, somewhere in the west of England, where they put pressure on their head teacher to change the curriculum. So they got a petition together and said, basically, after this Black Lives Matter stuff, we're not satisfied with the way the curriculum's taught. We want more Black history in this curriculum. And they went round the current students. They got ex-students who'd, graduated or whatever. They sent it in, and basically the head teacher was like, OK, better change the curriculum. So these are practical ways that young people can leverage the power in their voice by, as I say, using the mechanisms. So it involves a bit of research to understand what the local picture looks like. And it takes a bit of work, as I say, to learn how to write letters, learn how to interact with some of these powerful individuals, because they will listen to young people.
Amazing. Well, Hank, it's been amazing. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing so much wisdom and being so vulnerable. Same with you, Benito. We've loved having you. Your perspective on young people and the church and everything else has been so powerful. Hey, why don't we close this time in prayer? Who'd like to pray today?
I can pray.
Amazing.
Yes, Val, go on.
Father, Lord, I just thank you for the conversation that we had today, Lord. I pray that this conversation won't end just today, but we will continue to have conversations like this, Lord. I pray that as we leave today and as people are watching online, Lord, I pray that you'll give them the confidence to just ask questions, Lord. I pray that you'll give them the strength to learn, and I pray that this racism problem is not something that will continue on in generations to come, Lord. I pray that this will be something that ends in our generation, Lord. I pray that you give us the confidence to speak out against injustice, Lord. I pray that you give us wisdom when we need to handle some situations, Lord. I pray that you give us patience, Lord. But most of all, Lord, I just pray that you help us address any situation with love, Lord. I thank you for everything that you're doing and everything that you are going to do. In your precious name I pray, amen.
Amen. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed our chat today. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to get in touch.
If you have never joined an Alpha course, they take place across the globe, and they are not just for youth. Everyone of every age, from every background and experience can be part of one. They are strictly inclusive, so why don't you join us?
Yeah, so if you want to, head to our website, alpha.org/youth, and check out our social media channels. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Living in London, born and raised in London, I love my city. I think East London is the best. I'm just gonna throw it out.
I personally didn't go because my parents were like, it's illegal. But sorry.